I never imagined my 10-year wedding anniversary would be spent signing acquisition papers for my husband's company, rather than renewing our vows in Bali as planned. Life has a way of rewriting your story when you least expect it. 3 months ago, I discovered David's affair with Jessica from accounting during what should have been a surprise lunch date. Now he's about to discover I'm his new boss, not his soon-to-be ex-wife begging for reconciliation. Revenge isn't my style, but justice served with a side of irony just might be the perfect dish after all. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The day everything changed started like any other Tuesday in Seattle. Gray skies threatening rain, my usual morning stop at the daily grind for a vanilla latte, and a calendar full of back-to-back meetings. I'm Sarah Mitchell, or at least I was then. Executive consultant at Wilson Strategic Partners, married to David Mitchell, senior product director at NorthStar Technologies, and living what I believed was the successful life we'd both worked so hard to build. Our downtown loft overlooked the waterfront. We had the right friends, attended the right events, and had mastered the delicate dance of 2 ambitious careers. We'd postponed having children to focus on our professional growth, a decision that seemed sensible at 30, slightly concerning at 35, and now at 38, felt like a blessing in disguise given recent developments. You're distracted. Today, Margaret Wilson, my boss and mentor, observed as we wrapped up our morning strategy session. Her silver-streaked bob and impeccable pantsuits had been a constant in my professional life for the past 7 years. She'd plucked me from a middling position at a struggling startup and had been grooming me ever since. Anniversary plans, I replied with a practiced smile. Trying to finalize some details for our trip next month? The lie came easily, which should have been my first warning sign about the state of my marriage. The truth, that David had been increasingly distant, working late more often and somehow always too tired for conversations deeper than discussing dinner options, felt too revealing for a professional setting. 10 years is significant, Margaret nodded approvingly. Jonathan and I did the Maldives for our 10th, worth every penny. I made a note to research the Maldives as a convincing alternative to our actual plan, which had been Bali. David and I had even put down deposits 6 months ago, back when things still felt solid between us. Actually, Margaret continued, closing her laptop, that's perfect timing. I've been meaning to discuss something with you, and perhaps your anniversary provides the right framework. My attention sharpened. Margaret wasn't one for personal discussions during billable hours. The Keller acquisition is finalizing next week, she said, referring to one of our firm's biggest recent moves, acquiring a smaller but highly specialized consulting agency. It's created some interesting opportunities for restructuring, and I'd like you to consider taking on a larger role. I'm listening, I said, trying to mask my excitement. I'd been angling for advancement for the past 18 months, carefully, positioning myself for exactly this kind of opportunity. Executive Vice President of Operations, Margaret stated, watching my reaction closely. Overseeing our entire West Coast portfolio, including the new Keller accounts. My breath caught. This wasn't just a promotion. It was a catapult 3, levels up the organizational chart, bypassing dozens of equally ambitious colleagues. That's substantial, I managed, mind racing through the implications. The salary increase alone would transform my financial reality, not to mention the authority and visibility. It is, Margaret agreed. And it would require substantial commitment, more travel, longer hours, higher stakes. She paused, folding her hands on the table. How would David feel about that? The question landed like a stone in still water, sending ripples through my professional composure. In our years of mentorship, Margaret had rarely mentioned my husband, maintaining a careful separation between my personal and professional lives. He'd be supportive, I answered automatically, the expected response from a woman whose marriage was a partnership of equals. But even as I said it, doubt crept in. Would he? The David I married 10 years ago absolutely would have championed my success. The David who now came home late smelling faintly of unfamiliar perfume and checking his phone notifications with suspicious frequency, I wasn't so sure. Sarah. Margaret's tone shifted, slightly warmer but more serious. I need to be direct with you because this opportunity won't wait. I've watched you balance your ambitions against what you perceive as the needs of your marriage for years now. You've turned down assignments that required travel, scaled back proposals that would have demanded evening work, all while David's career has progressed unimpeded by such considerations. My cheeks flushed. I started to protest, but Margaret raised her hand. This isn't criticism, it's observation. We make choices based on what we value, and you've consistently demonstrated that you value your marriage. That's admirable. She leaned forward slightly. But this role requires someone who can prioritize the firm above everything else for the next few years. I need to know if you're that person. The question hung between us, deceptively simple yet impossibly complex. Was I that person? Could I be? And what would becoming that person mean for my marriage, already showing stress fractures I'd been desperately trying to ignore? I'd like until Friday to consider, I said finally. This isn't just about scheduling. It's about the kind of life I want to build. Margaret nodded, seemingly satisfied with my thoughtfulness. Friday works. And Sarah? This conversation remains between us until you decide. Opportunities like this attract attention, and not all of it supportive. As I gathered my materials to leave, Margaret added, "One more thing. Consider what you want independent of David's reaction. 10 years is a significant milestone, but it's a fraction of your professional lifespan." Her words followed me as I navigated the rest of my workday, through client calls and team meetings where I smiled and nodded appropriately while my mind churned through this unexpected crossroads. By 4 o'clock, I'd made a decision, not about the promotion yet, but about something more immediate. I would surprise David at work, take him to early dinner at Cascadia, the waterfront restaurant, where he'd proposed a decade ago, and have an honest conversation about our future. If I was contemplating a career move that would reshape our lives, we needed to be in sync. I texted Emily, my closest friend since college. "Surprise anniversary celebration with D tonight. Wish me luck." Her response came quickly. "Good luck. He doesn't deserve you, but I'll keep that opinion to myself. Call me after, no matter how late." I frowned at my phone. Emily had grown increasingly critical of David over the past year. I'd attributed it to her own recent divorce, coloring her perspective on marriage in general, but part of me wondered if she saw something I was refusing to acknowledge. NorthStar Technologies occupied the top 8 floors of a gleaming high-rise. Downtown, all glass and steel and carefully cultivated innovation energy. The receptionist, a young man with fashionably oversized glasses, smiled as I approached. "I'm here to surprise my husband, David Mitchell," I explained. "Senior Product Director on floor 22. "Of course, Mrs. Mitchell. Let me just check if he's available." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. He tapped efficiently at his keyboard, then frowned slightly. "It looks like Mr. Mitchell is in a closed meeting right now. Would you like to wait? I can let you through to his assistant." "That's perfect, thank you. I'm happy to wait near his office." I'd spent enough time at corporate events here to know the layout, and David's assistant Renee always had the inside track on his schedule. The elevator whisked me to the 22nd floor, where NorthStar's product development teams occupied an open-concept workspace punctuated by glass-walled meeting rooms and the occasional private office for directors like David. I spotted Renee at her desk, headset on, intensely focused on her monitor. "Sarah!" she exclaimed when she noticed me, quickly removing her headset. "This is a surprise. Are you and David heading somewhere exciting?" Her eyes flicked to my business attire, clearly assessing whether I was dressed for a special occasion. "Just thought I'd surprise him with an early dinner," I replied, noting her slightly flustered reaction. "The calendar said he should be free after 4. Is he still in a meeting?" "Yes, with product testing," she answered, stumbling slightly over the words. "In conference room B. He should be wrapping up soon." Something in her hesitation triggered a subtle alarm in my mind. Renee had worked with David for 3 years. She was unfailingly efficient and normally unflappable. This small glitch in her professional demeanor felt significant. "Perfect. I'll just peek in and see if..." "They're finishing up," I said casually, turning toward the hallway where the conference rooms were located. "Wait!" Renee called a touch too loudly. Several heads turned in the open workspace. She lowered her voice. "It's a sensitive prototype discussion. Let me text him that you're here." Now my internal alarms were blaring. In 5 years of occasional surprise visits, I'd never been prevented from simply finding my husband. NorthStar wasn't developing military-grade secrets. They made enterprise software for logistics companies. "No need," I smiled, already walking away. "I'll be very quiet." Conference room B was at the end of the hallway, its frosted glass walls providing privacy while maintaining the illusion of transparency the company prided itself on. As I approached, I could make out 2 silhouettes through the frosted glass. One standing, one seated. Something about their positioning seemed intimate rather than professional. I hesitated, hand on the door handle, suddenly uncertain. What was I doing? Checking up on my husband like a suspicious spouse. This wasn't me. I trusted David. We had a decade of history, of building a life together. But then I remembered the unexplained late nights, the emotional distance, the way he angled his phone, away when texts came in. Small things that I'd rationalized individually but that formed a pattern I could no longer ignore. I pushed the door open silently. David was leaning against the conference table, his back to the door. Across from him stood Jessica Barnes, a financial analyst from accounting whom I'd met at company functions. She was laughing at something he'd said, her hand resting on his chest with casual intimacy. As I watched, frozen in the doorway, she rose on tiptoes to kiss him, not a friendly peck, but the practiced kiss of lovers comfortable with each other's bodies. The world seemed to tilt sideways. Sound receded, replaced by a high-pitched ringing in my ears. I must have made some noise because they suddenly broke apart, turning toward me with matching expressions of shock. "Sarah!" David's voice sounded distant, underwater. "This isn't..." "I can explain." The cliché of his response almost made me laugh. Instead, I found myself speaking with remarkable calmness, as if discussing an interesting market trend rather than witnessing my marriage implode. No explanation necessary. The situation seemed self-explanatory. I looked at Jessica, who had the decency to flush crimson. I've heard accounting can be quite stimulating, but I hadn't realized how literally. "Sarah, please." David stepped toward me, his handsome face contorted with some emotion. Guilt, certainly. But was there also relief at being discovered? "Let's talk privately." "I think you're busy with your meeting," I replied, gesturing to the conference room. "Don't... Let me interrupt the key in product testing." I turned and walked away, my heels clicking precisely on the polished concrete floor, back straight, chin high. Renee avoided my eyes as I passed her desk. In the elevator, I pressed the lobby button with a steady finger, waited until the doors closed, and then leaned against the wall, legs suddenly unable to support my weight. 10 years. 10 years of building a life, of making compromises, of weaving my ambitions around the fabric of our marriage. And all along, he had been. What? How long had this been happening? With Jessica? With others? The possibilities unfurled like a toxic flower in my mind. My phone buzzed in my bag. David, already calling to begin damage control. I silenced it without looking. Then I texted Emily. Plan changed. Coming to your place. Open wine. 3 hours and 2 bottles of Cabernet later, sprawled on Emily's sofa surrounded by tissues and takeout containers, I had moved from shocked numbness to white-hot rage. 10 years, I exclaimed for perhaps the 20th time. 10 years and he throws it away for Jessica from accounting with her perfect yoga body and her stupid little financial models. Emily, who had transitioned from supportive outrage to practical strategizing, refilled my glass. So what's the plan? Because you know I'm team set his stuff on fire, but there are legal implications to consider. I don't know, I admitted, the anger briefly giving way to fear. I built my life around our partnership. My job, our home, our friends, everything is tangled together. Not everything, Emily corrected. You've always maintained your own identity, your own career. Speaking of which, what about that promotion Margaret mentioned? Talk about perfect timing. The promotion. In the drama of discovering David's betrayal, I'd temporarily forgotten about the career opportunity waiting for my decision. That would mean more travel, longer hours, I said slowly. All the things I've been avoiding to maintain our so-called work-life balance. The balance you maintained while he was apparently achieving work-life balance with Jessica, Emily pointed out, not unkindly. Maybe it's time to prioritize yourself for once. My phone, which I'd finally unmuted, chimed with a text. David. Again, please come home. We need to talk. I made a terrible mistake. Emily read it over my shoulder and snorted. Mistake implies a one-time error in judgment. Finding your boss's husband with his tongue down a coworker's throat suggests an ongoing series of deliberate choices. He's not her boss, I corrected automatically. Different departments. Small mercies, I suppose. You're missing the point, Emily sighed. The question isn't about their workplace hierarchy. It's about what you're going to do now. What was I going to do? The question echoed in my mind, bringing with it a surprising clarity through the fog of wine and betrayal. For years, I'd made decisions within the framework of my marriage, considering David's preferences, our mutual goals, the careful balance we'd constructed. Now that framework was shattered, and in its absence, I could suddenly see possibilities I'd never allowed myself to fully consider. I'm going to take the promotion, I said, the decision crystallizing as I spoke it. I'm going to say yes to Margaret on Friday. Emily raised her glass in salute. That's my girl. Career advancement as the first step in your revenge plan. I love it. It's not about revenge, I corrected, though part of me thrilled at the thought of David realizing what he'd lost as I ascended professionally without him. It's about finally putting myself first. But as I said it, a memory surfaced. David mentioning over dinner last month that NorthStar was seeking new investors, that the company's visionary product line was being hampered by insufficient capital. He'd been frustrated, saying the executive team didn't appreciate the potential they were sitting on. And just like that, the seed of an idea took root. Margaret's firm specialized in identifying undervalued companies for acquisition. We had capital partners constantly seeking new investment opportunities. What if? Actually, I said slowly, setting down my wine glass, I think I need to make a call. Emily raised an eyebrow. To David? Because drunk dialing your cheating husband rarely ends productively. No, I replied, a plan forming with surprising speed and clarity. To Margaret. I believe I've identified a potential acquisition target that could provide exceptional returns for our firm. and I'd like to lead the assessment team. NorthStar? Emily guessed, her eyes widening. Sarah, that's not revenge. That's nuclear war. I shook my head, suddenly feeling more sober than I had any right to be after 2 bottles of wine. It's business. Just business. The fact that it happens to intersect with my personal life is an interesting coincidence. As I reached for my phone to text Margaret a meeting request for first thing tomorrow, I felt something unexpected beneath the lingering pain and anger, a flutter of excitement, of possibility. For 10 years, I'd been Sarah Mitchell, David's wife, carefully managing my ambitions to maintain our partnership. Now I had the chance to discover who Sarah Mitchell might become when unleashed to pursue her potential without constraint. If that journey happened to include acquiring the company where my soon-to-be ex-husband built his career, well, as Margaret always said, the best business decisions often satisfy multiple objectives simultaneously. You know what they say, I murmured, more to myself than to Emily as I drafted the meeting request. Don't get mad. Get everything. The next morning arrived with the predictable hangover and 17 missed calls from David. I ignored both, focusing instead on preparing for my impromptu meeting with Margaret. I'd showered and changed at Emily's apartment, borrowing a sleek black dress that was a touch more commanding than my usual workplace attire. Today wasn't about blending in. It was about claiming space. Margaret's assistant looked surprised when I arrived at her office 15 minutes before my scheduled time. She's on a call, but I'll let her know you're here, he said, giving my atypically severe appearance a curious once-over. I waited, reviewing the hastily assembled notes on my tablet. NorthStar Technologies was privately held but actively seeking capital investment for expansion. Their logistics software platform had secured several major clients in the past year, but they needed significant resources to scale. Their executive team was solid but conservative, possibly resistant to acquisition, except their CEO, Robert Thompson, was approaching retirement age and rumored to be seeking an exit strategy. It was thin, based largely on industry gossip and snippets David had shared over dinner, but it was enough to start a conversation, and conversations were what Margaret excelled at turning into opportunities. Sarah, Margaret greeted me, emerging from her office. You're early, and you look determined. I've made my decision about the promotion, I stated, following her into her office without waiting for an invitation. I'm accepting, and I have a proposition regarding the first acquisition I'd like to spearhead. Margaret raised an eyebrow, settling behind her desk. I'm listening. For the next 20 minutes, I outlined what I knew about NorthStar, its market position, its untapped potential, and why our firm would be the ideal acquirer. I emphasized the cultural alignment, the complementary expertise, and the significant return on investment we could expect. What I didn't mention was my personal connection, that my husband worked there, that less than 24 hours ago I'd discovered him betraying our marriage in a conference room with a colleague. That part of me craved the exquisite justice of becoming the power behind his professional throne, just as he was losing his place in my personal life. When I finished, Margaret was silent for a long moment, studying me with unnerving intensity. This is well researched for a spontaneous proposal, she said finally. And NorthStar has crossed our radar before. Their market positioning is interesting, if underutilized. She tilted her head slightly. But I'm curious why this particular company has captured your attention so passionately. I had prepared for this question, crafting a response that was technically honest while strategically incomplete. I've followed them for some time through industry connections. They're at a critical inflection point. Innovative product, growing, market share, but leadership that lacks vision for scaling. It's the perfect acquisition profile. Margaret tapped her pen against her desk, clearly not entirely convinced. And this has nothing to do with the fact that your husband works there? Senior product director, if I recall correctly. My carefully constructed composure faltered. How did you— Please, Margaret waved dismissively. I make it my business to know the professional connections of everyone in my senior team, particularly their spouses. She leaned forward. What's really going on, Sarah? In that moment, I made a crucial calculation. Margaret respected ambition and strategic thinking, but she detested deception. Partial truth would undermine my credibility more than the complete, messy reality. David is having an affair with a colleague, I stated flatly. I discovered them yesterday. Our marriage is ending. Margaret's expression didn't change, but her eyes sharpened with interest. And you want to acquire his company as— what? Revenge? Leverage in the divorce? I want the promotion because I've earned it, I replied evenly. I want to acquire NorthStar because it makes business sense. The personal satisfaction of transforming my husband's professional landscape while he's destabilized my personal one is a secondary benefit. To my surprise, Margaret laughed, a genuine, appreciative sound I'd rarely heard in our professional relationship. Now that's the kind of integrated thinking I've been waiting to see from you, she said, her amusement fading into something more calculating. Personal passion channeled into professional opportunity. I always knew you had it in you, but you've been playing it safe. She picked up her phone. Michael, clear my calendar until noon, and get me whatever preliminary research we have on NorthStar Technologies. To me, she added, we'll need to move quickly if we want to capitalize on your unique insights before circumstances change. Circumstances? I echoed. Divorces get messy, Margaret stated matter-of-factly. Right now, you have information. Advantage. He doesn't know you know people who could acquire his company. Once lawyers get involved, communication barriers go up. She gestured to the chair across from her. Sit. Tell me everything you know about NorthStar's internal structure, decision-making processes, and pain points. Everything. For the next 2 hours, I emptied my memory of every relevant detail David had ever shared about his company. The CEO's leadership style, the board's risk aversion, the tension between product innovation and marketing priorities, the informal power structures that shape decisions. With each revelation, I felt a strange mixture of guilt and liberation. These were confidences shared in a marriage I had believed was a partnership. Using them now felt simultaneously like betrayal and reclamation. Margaret took notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions or cross-referencing with data her assistant brought in. By 11, we had the skeleton of an acquisition strategy that leveraged NorthStar's strengths while addressing its vulnerabilities, including a leadership team potentially receptive to outside investment, given the right approach. We'll need to move discreetly but decisively, Margaret concluded, reviewing our notes. I'll have legal draft preliminary approach documents by end of week. In the meantime, I suggest you secure your personal position. Meaning? I asked. Meaning separate your finances from David's before he realizes what's happening. Consult a divorce attorney. I'll send you contact information for several excellent ones. And, she added with a pointed look, maintain absolute confidentiality about this potential acquisition. If David gets wind of it, the information advantage disappears. I nodded, reality crashing back as the adrenaline of strategic planning faded. I had a marriage to end, a life to disentangle, all while orchestrating what could be the most significant professional move of my career. One more thing, Margaret said as I gathered my things to leave. The promotion. It's yours effective, immediately. I need you operating with full authority as we move forward. She fixed me with her penetrating gaze. Don't make me regret accelerating the timeline. You won't, I promised, straightening my shoulders. Thank you for the opportunity. Don't thank me, she replied coolly. This isn't a favor. It's recognition of potential I've seen in you for years. Potential you're finally ready to embrace because circumstances have eliminated your self-imposed limitations. Her words followed me as I left the building, harsh but undeniably true. For years, I'd calibrated my ambition to maintain what I believed was a balanced marriage. Now that illusion was shattered, and in its absence, I was discovering capacities I'd never fully acknowledged. My phone buzzed with an incoming call. David again. This time, I answered. "We need to talk." His voice came through, a mixture of pleading and defensiveness. "What you saw, it's not what you think. Jessica and I, it's complicated." "Actually, it's quite simple," I replied, my voice steady, as I walked toward the office of the divorce attorney Margaret had recommended, whose secretary had miraculously found an opening for me that afternoon. "But you're right about one thing. We definitely need to talk." "Just not about reconciliation," I added silently. "About division of assets, separation agreements, and the professional restructuring that was about to transform his world just as thoroughly as he had transformed mine." The game was changing, and for the first time in our decade together, I was the one rewriting the rules. The law office of Michael Green was nothing like I expected. Instead of the imposing mahogany and leather I'd anticipated, his space was modern, filled with natural light and furnished with sleek Scandinavian designs. The man himself matched his environment, sharp, contemporary, and refreshingly direct. "So," Michael said after I'd outlined my situation, his fingers steepled beneath his chin, "you discovered your husband's infidelity yesterday. You've been offered a major promotion today, and you're potentially orchestrating the acquisition of his company." He leaned back in his chair. "That's quite a 48 hours, Ms. Mitchell." "Sarah," I corrected automatically. "And yes, it's been eventful." "May I speak candidly?" he asked, though his tone suggested it wasn't really a question. When I nodded, he continued, "Most clients come to me immediately after discovery of infidelity in one of two states: devastated collapse or vengeful rage. You're displaying remarkable strategic clarity. It's unusual." "I'm compartmentalizing," I admitted. "The personal pain exists, but I've set it aside temporarily to focus on securing my position." Michael nodded approvingly. "That's wise." Divorce is as much a business transaction as an emotional separation, and those who approach it pragmatically typically fare better. He opened a sleek laptop. "Let's start with the practical questions. Washington is a community property state, meaning assets acquired during the marriage are generally split equally. How long have you been married?" 10 years next month, I replied. The irony isn't lost on me. "Joint bank accounts? Investment portfolios?" "Both. We maintain individual accounts for personal spending, but our savings, investments, and retirement accounts are jointly held." "Real estate?" "Our condo downtown, purchased 7 years ago, both names on the mortgage." "Children?" I shook my head. "We decided to focus on our careers first." "That simplifies things considerably," Michael observed, making notes. "Any prenuptial agreement?" "No," I admitted. "We were young, idealistic, and not particularly wealthy when we married." "And now?" "Combined income just under $400,000 annually. Roughly 60-40 split in David's favor, though my new position will likely shift that balance. Assets including the condo, investments, and retirement accounts total approximately $2 million. Michael raised an eyebrow. "Impressive for a decade's work. Any significant debts beyond the mortgage?" "David's MBA loans, about $40,000. Remaining. We've prioritized paying those down over the past 5 years." "Generous of you," Michael noted, "especially considering they're technically his premarital debt." I shrugged. It was an investment in our future, or so I thought. For the next hour, Michael methodically documented our financial landscape, asking precise questions about accounts, assets, and potential complications. The process was oddly calming, reducing 10 years of marriage to a spreadsheet of assets and liabilities, a problem to be solved rather than a life unraveling. Based on what you've shared, Michael said finally, we're looking at a relatively straightforward division of assets. Washington's community property laws provide a clear framework. However, he fixed me with a pointed look. Things become considerably more complex if NorthStar's acquisition proceeds while your divorce is pending. How so? I asked, though I suspected I knew the answer. David's employment at NorthStar likely includes stock options, performance bonuses, or other equity incentives that could be significantly impacted by an acquisition. If those appreciate during the divorce proceedings, determining what portion constitutes community property becomes contentious. And if he learns I'm involved in the acquisition? Michael's expression turned grim. That introduces potential. Claims of conflict of interest, insider trading concerns, or accusations that you're using privileged information obtained through the marital relationship for financial advantage. But I'm not, I protested. The acquisition makes business sense independent of my personal situation. Intent matters less than appearance in these situations, Michael warned. My strong recommendation is to complete your divorce settlement before the acquisition becomes public knowledge. Ideally, with terms that explicitly address future changes in David's compensation or equity position. I processed this advice, mentally adjusting timelines. How quickly can we move? With motivated parties and full financial disclosure, an uncontested divorce in Washington can be finalized in as little as 90 days after filing. Given the assets involved and potential complications, 4 to 6 months is more realistic. He paused. Unless David decides to be difficult. The thought of David dragging out our divorce out of spite or greed sent a chill through me. For all my strategic planning, I couldn't predict how he would react once the initial shock and guilt faded. What do you recommend as immediate next steps? I asked. First, secure your financial position, Michael advised. Open individual accounts if you don't already have them. Transfer half of your joint liquid assets, no more, as that could appear punitive to a judge. Document everything meticulously. And the condo? Michael considered this. Who has stronger emotional attachment to it? David, I answered without hesitation. It was his dream location. I preferred something with more character, but compromised. Then it becomes a negotiating chip. He keeps the condo. You receive offsetting assets. Speaking of which, he continued, prepare a complete inventory of personal possessions with approximate values. Focus particularly on items with significant monetary or sentimental worth. The pragmatic dismantling of our shared life continued for another 30 minutes. By the time I left Michael's office, I had a comprehensive checklist of actions to take in the next 72 hours, from financial maneuvers to gathering documentation to preparations for the conversation with David that would formally end our marriage. Outside, Seattle's perpetual drizzle had intensified to a proper downpour. I stood under the building's awning, watching pedestrians hurry past with umbrellas and rain jackets, each focused on their destination, oblivious to my personal earthquake. There was something both isolating and liberating in that anonymity, the knowledge that while my world was shattering, the city continued its rhythms uninterrupted. My phone vibrated with a text from Margaret. Initial approach to Thompson scheduled for Monday. Be prepared to join if receptive. Documents will require your review this weekend. The acquisition was moving forward with typically ruthless efficiency. In less than a week, David's professional world would begin the transformation he didn't yet see coming. I should have felt triumph, or at least satisfaction, but instead found myself ambushed by a wave of grief so acute it momentarily stole my breath. 10 years. A decade of shared dreams, inside jokes, mutual support through setbacks, celebrations of victories. The life we'd built together hadn't been perfect, but it had been hours. And now I was systematically dismantling it, piece by piece, with the same focused determination I brought to challenging work projects. I allowed myself exactly 3 minutes to acknowledge the grief, standing still as rain pounded the awning above me and tears mingled with raindrops on my cheeks. Then I straightened, hailed a rideshare, and directed the driver to my bank's main branch. The time for sentiment had passed. Now was the time for action. By evening, I had completed nearly half of Michael's checklist. Individual accounts established, joint accounts documented and partially redistributed, investment portfolios inventoried, a safe deposit box secured for important documents and select valuables. Throughout, I maintained meticulous records of every transaction, every transfer, creating the paper trail that would protect me if David chose to be vindictive. I hadn't returned to our condo, choosing instead to extend my stay at Emily's apartment while she visited her mother in Portland for the weekend. David's calls had become increasingly frantic throughout the day. His most recent voicemail struck, a tone between pleading and indignant. "Sarah, this is ridiculous. You can't just disappear. We need to talk about what happened. It wasn't what it looked like. Please come home." Not what it looked like. The absurdity of that claim almost made me laugh. What exactly did he think it looked like when I found him with another woman's lips on his, her hand on his chest, in an intimate embrace that spoke of practiced familiarity rather than first-time impulse? I was contemplating this when my phone lit up with a call, not from David, but from a number I didn't recognize. Cautiously, I answered. "Sarah, this is Jessica Barnes." The sound of her voice sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. Jessica from accounting. The woman I'd found kissing my husband just over 24 hours ago. "How did you get this number?" I demanded, my professional composure momentarily abandoned. "From David's phone," she admitted, her voice smaller than I remembered. "He doesn't know. I'm calling. Please don't hang up." I should have ended the call immediately. Nothing she could say would change what I'd seen or alter my course of action. And yet, curiosity, or perhaps some masochistic impulse to understand the full dimensions of my humiliation, kept me on the line. "You have 1 minute," I stated coldly. "Use it wisely." "I know you must hate me," Jessica began, "and you have every right to. But there are things you don't know, things David should tell you, but probably won't." Despite myself, I was intrigued. Such as? "It wasn't a casual fling. We've been seeing each other for almost a year." Her words landed like physical blows. "He told me your marriage was effectively over, that you were staying together for appearances but had an understanding." "An understanding," I repeated, my voice hollow. "A year. Nearly a third of our marriage recontextualized in an instant. He said you were focused on your career, that you two had grown apart but decided to maintain the appearance of marriage for professional reasons." Jessica's voice cracked slightly. I believed him. I'm not trying to excuse what I did, but I thought, I didn't think I was breaking up a real marriage. The calculated deception stunned me. David had created an elaborate fiction to justify his infidelity, not just to Jessica, but perhaps to himself. A narrative that cast me as the career-obsessed wife who had emotionally abandoned our marriage, the very compromise I had consistently made to prioritize our relationship. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, genuine confusion temporarily, displacing anger. There was a long pause before Jessica answered. "Because when I saw your face yesterday, the shock, the hurt, I realized he'd been lying to me too. And I think," she hesitated, "I think you deserve to know the truth before you decide what to do next." A bizarre sort of kinship flickered between us. Two women deceived by the same man, each fed narratives that diminished the other. But the feeling passed quickly, replaced by renewed determination. "Thank you for your honesty," I said, surprised to find I meant it. It clarifies things considerably. For what it's worth, Jessica added hesitantly, I ended things with him last night, after I understood what had really happened. The information registered as potentially useful rather than emotionally significant. David, abandoned by both wife and lover in the span of 24 hours, would be particularly vulnerable to professional disruption. Goodbye, Jessica, I said, ending the call before she could respond. I sat motionless in Emily's quiet apartment, Jessica's, revelations expanding through my consciousness like ink in water, coloring everything they touched. A year. 12 months of deception while I carefully arranged my schedule to accommodate his late meetings, thoughtfully prepared his favorite, meals, listened attentively to his work frustrations, all while believing we were partners navigating life together. The grief I'd felt earlier transformed, hardening into something colder and more focused. I picked up my phone and composed a text to David. I'll be at the condo tomorrow at noon to collect essential items. We can talk then. Do not contact me before that time. Then I opened my laptop and returned to the NorthStar acquisition documents Margaret had sent for review. If David had spent a year constructing elaborate fictions about our marriage, I would now dedicate myself to rewriting the ending, not just of our relationship, but of the professional security he had taken for granted while betraying me at home. By midnight, I had completed my review of the acquisition proposal, adding detailed insights about NorthStar's organizational psychology that would prove invaluable in the negotiation phase. The documents revealed Margaret's ruthless efficiency. The approach was structured to appeal to Thompson's desire for legacy, while addressing the board's risk aversion, with careful contingencies for various response scenarios. My own role was clearly defined. Initially as strategic advisor leveraging industry expertise, then transitioning to integration lead once the acquisition was secured. The position would place me directly above David in the new organizational structure, with authority over product development priorities and resource allocation. It was, objectively, brilliant business strategy, identifying an undervalued company with complementary capabilities, approaching at precisely their moment of capital need, and structuring an offer that addressed key stakeholder concerns. That, it would simultaneously reshape my soon-to-be ex-husband's professional landscape was a secondary effect, albeit a deeply satisfying one. I finally fell asleep surrounded by spreadsheets and legal documents, the architecture of my new future, taking shape around me. Morning arrived with unexpected clarity. I woke before my alarm, the mental fog of shock and betrayal having lifted overnight, replaced by focused resolve. Today, I would confront David, beginning the formal dissolution of our marriage. Tomorrow, Margaret would initiate contact with Thompson, setting in motion the business transformation that would run parallel to my personal one. I dressed with deliberate care, not in the power suit of yesterday's strategic meetings, but in casual clothes that subtly reinforced my message. Jeans, a soft sweater, comfortable boots, clothes for packing, for transitions, for walking away. I pulled my hair back in a simple ponytail and applied minimal makeup. This meeting wasn't about impression management. It was about reclaiming my narrative. The rideshare dropped me at our condo building precisely at noon. The doorman, Alfonso, greeted me with his usual warmth, showing no indication that he recognized anything amiss. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Mitchell. Mr. Mitchell is upstairs. Mentioned you were expected." "Thank you, Alfonso," I replied, momentarily, wondering if David's infidelity had been visible to the staff who orbited our daily lives. Had Alfonso seen Jessica entering our building during my business trips? Had the concierge arranged deliveries for David's lover that I had attributed to his thoughtfulness toward me? The elevator ride to the 14th floor gave me time to center myself, to remember Michael's advice about this conversation. Remain calm, stick to facts, avoid recriminations, focus on next steps rather than past hurts. This wasn't about emotional closure. It was about efficient disentanglement. I used my key to enter the condo that had been home for 7 years. The familiar scents, the sandalwood candles I preferred, the espresso from David's morning coffee ritual, hit me with unexpected force. For all its sleek minimalism and carefully curated decor, this space contained the physical manifestation of our shared history. David was waiting in the living room, perched awkwardly on the edge of the sofa we'd spent months selecting, testing various models for the perfect balance of aesthetics and comfort. He looked terrible, unshaven, hair disheveled, still wearing the clothes he'd had on 2 days ago when I discovered him with Jessica. The sight should have inspired satisfaction, or at least vindication. Instead, I felt an unwelcome pang of concern, quickly suppressed. "Sarah," he said, rising quickly. "Thank God. I've been going crazy trying to reach you." He moved toward me, arms slightly extended as if for an embrace, then stopped when he registered my rigid posture. "Where have you been? We need to talk about what happened." "That's why I'm here," I replied, maintaining a careful distance. "To talk. But first, I need to collect some things." I moved past him toward our bedroom, acutely aware of his presence following behind me. The room was in disarray. Drawers partially open, clothes strewn across the bed, evidence of David's uncharacteristic disorder. I retrieved the suitcase from our closet and began methodically selecting essentials: clothes for work, toiletries, the jewelry my grandmother had left me, important documents from my bedside drawer. "You're packing," David observed, his voice hollow. "You're not coming back tonight." "I'm not coming back at all," I corrected, continuing to fill the suitcase. "I've retained an attorney. He'll be contacting you to begin divorce proceedings." "Divorce?" David's shock seemed genuine, which only strengthened my resolve. "Sarah, you can't be serious. One mistake doesn't erase 10 years of marriage." I paused, meeting his eyes directly for the first time. "It wasn't one mistake, David. It was an affair that lasted nearly a year." His face drained of color. "How did you—" "Jessica called me," I said, resuming my packing. "Apparently, she has more integrity than you do. She told me everything, including the lies you told her about our marriage." "I can explain," he began, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "Things between us had been distant. You were always working, always preoccupied with your next project. I felt invisible in my own marriage." The familiar deflection technique almost made me laugh. How predictable that David would reframe his betrayal as my failure, casting himself as the neglected husband driven to another woman's arms by my career ambitions. "Interesting perspective," I said, zipping the suitcase closed, "especially considering I've spent years declining advancement opportunities to maintain a work-life balance for your benefit. Opportunities I'll now be accepting, by the way." "What does that mean?" he asked, wariness creeping into his tone. "It means Margaret offered me Executive Vice President of Operations," I replied, watching his expression shift from confusion to realization. "Effective immediately. I'll be overseeing West Coast operations and leading several significant new initiatives." "The position you turned down last year," David said slowly. "The one that would have meant regular travel, longer hours." "The very same," I confirmed. Funny how quickly priorities can clarify when you discover your decade-long partnership was a fiction. I wheeled the suitcase toward the door, but David stepped in front of me, not touching, but blocking my path. "We need to talk about this," he insisted. "You can't just throw away 10 years because of one mistake." "A year-long affair is not one mistake," I interrupted, my composure finally cracking. "It's hundreds of deliberate choices. Every time you texted her, every secret meeting, every lie you told me about working late. Those were all individual decisions to betray our marriage." "I never meant to hurt you," he said, his voice dropping to that persuasive register he used when negotiating. "Things with Jessica just happened. I got caught up in something that felt exciting, different. But it wasn't real. What we have, that's real." "Had," I corrected. What we had. And apparently that wasn't particularly real either, given the narrative you created about our marriage to justify your affair. David flinched. Jessica shouldn't have told me the truth, I finished for him. Shown me basic respect? No, I suppose that would have been inconvenient for you. I moved to step around him, but he caught my arm gently. Sarah, please, can we just talk about this? Really talk? I know I've made terrible mistakes, but don't we owe our marriage at least one honest conversation before ending it? For a moment, I hesitated. Part of me, the part that still remembered the young man who had proposed on the waterfront with nervous excitement, who had supported my career aspirations even when they intimidated him, who had nursed me through pneumonia with tender attention, wanted to engage, to understand how we had arrived at this devastating juncture. But the strategic clarity that had emerged from my meeting with Michael reasserted itself. An extended emotional conversation would serve David's interests, not mine. It would muddy waters that needed to remain clear for the legal and financial maneuvers already in motion. Our honest conversation happened every day for 10 years, I said, gently removing his hand from my arm. Or at least my side of it was honest. You chose a different path. I met his gaze directly. My attorney will contact yours. Until then, I suggest you focus on securing representation and preparing for an equitable division of assets. Assets, David repeated, bitterness seeping into his tone. Is that all our marriage has become to you? A balance sheet to be divided? You reduced our marriage to a convenient fiction that allowed you to pursue your desires without consequences, I replied evenly. I'm simply acknowledging the reality you created. I wheeled my suitcase to the door, then turned back one final time. I'll have Emily collect the rest of my things later this week. Please ensure you're not here when she does. Sarah, David called as I opened the door. I love you. Despite everything, I've always loved you. The declaration hung in the air between us, a desperate attempt to reestablish connection. 3 days ago, those words would have meant everything. Now, they registered as just another manipulation, a last-ditch effort to regain control of a situation rapidly spinning beyond his grasp. Goodbye, David, I said, stepping into the hallway and letting the door close behind me with quiet finality. In the elevator descending to the lobby, I exhaled slowly, releasing tension I hadn't realized I'd been holding. The conversation had gone almost exactly as Michael had predicted. Initial shock, attempts to minimize the betrayal, deflection of responsibility, and finally, emotional appeals designed to delay decisive action. What surprised me was my own response, not the wounded rage I might have expected, but a steady clarity about what mattered now, securing my future, professionally and personally. David's betrayal had fractured our present, but it would not determine my path forward. As I exited the building, my phone chimed with a message from Margaret. Thompson meeting confirmed for 9 a.m. Monday. Background materials attached. Be prepared to discuss integration strategy in detail. Integration strategy. The business term carried unintended irony. While I was disintegrating one aspect of my life, I was simultaneously planning the integration of 2 companies, including the one where my soon-to-be ex-husband had built his career, blissfully unaware of the seismic shift about to reshape his professional landscape, just as he had reshaped my personal one. I flagged a taxi, directing the driver to Emily's apartment. As Seattle's familiar skyline slid past the window, I found myself contemplating the parallel transformations unfolding in my life. The end of my marriage running alongside the beginning of my most significant professional challenge. The timing wasn't coincidental. For years, I'd calibrated my ambitions to maintain what I believed was a balanced partnership, unaware that David was making no such adjustments on his side. Now, liberated from that one-sided compromise, I was free to pursue opportunities I would have previously declined out of consideration for our marriage. including the acquisition that would place me directly in David's professional path, a prospect that filled me with complex emotions. Satisfaction, certainly, but also a lingering discomfort at the knowledge that personal and professional boundaries were blurring in ways I'd always carefully avoided. By the time I reached Emily's apartment, I had reached a decision. I would proceed with both the divorce and the acquisition, maintaining absolute separation between the two processes. The former would be handled with dispassionate efficiency, the latter with professional excellence. If they eventually converged in ways that affected David, that would be the natural consequence of his choices, not the result of vindictive design on my part. I stepped from the taxi into Seattle's persistent drizzle, suddenly aware that I was standing at the threshold of a life I hadn't chosen, but was now determined to shape on my own terms. The weight of betrayal still pressed against my chest, but alongside it grew something unexpected, a sense of possibility, of doors opening rather than closing. Whatever came next would be of my own design, unconstrained by the compromises I'd made for a partnership that had existed only in my imagination. That knowledge carried its own peculiar freedom, the liberation that comes not from absence of pain, but from clarity of purpose in its midst. Monday morning arrived with Seattle's characteristic gray skies and misting rain, a fitting backdrop for the pivotal meeting ahead. I arrived at Margaret's office an hour early, using the time to review my notes and center myself for what would be the most significant professional moment of my career thus far. The conference room Margaret had selected for our meeting with Robert Thompson featured floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Elliott Bay, the water a steely reflection of the clouded sky above. The room was deliberately impressive, designed to communicate success and solidity without ostentation, much like Margaret herself. "You look prepared," Margaret observed as she joined me, setting a slim portfolio on the polished table. She was dressed in her signature style, a tailored charcoal suit that projected authority without surrendering femininity. "How are you feeling?" "Focused," I replied, which was true but incomplete. Beneath my professional composure churned a complex mixture of anticipation, uncertainty, and lingering grief, the emotional aftermath of my confrontation with David still reverberating through my consciousness. Margaret studied me with her characteristic penetrating gaze. "Personal and professional boundaries, Sarah. They're essential in situations like this. Can you maintain them?" "Absolutely," I assured her, though the question triggered a flicker of doubt. Could I truly separate my personal motivations from professional judgment in an acquisition that would impact David so directly? "Good," Margaret nodded, seemingly satisfied. "Because Thompson is a shrewd negotiator, he'll be looking for any signs of agenda beyond business strategy." She tapped her portfolio. "Our approach is straightforward. NorthStar has innovative products but limited capital for scaling. We have the resources and market reach they need, plus complementary expertise in logistics implementation that enhances their core product." "And our integration strategy?" I asked, though I had already reviewed the documents extensively. "Preservation of product development teams, expansion of sales and implementation resources, and strategic leadership additions." Margaret's expression remained neutral, but her emphasis on the last point was unmistakable. "Thompson stays on as chairman emeritus for 3 years, maintaining the continuity clients need while we transition operational leadership." The unstated implication hung between us. David's team would remain intact, but under new management, specifically, under my oversight as integration lead transitioning to operational executive. The professional reshuffling would place him in a subordinate position to his soon-to-be ex-wife, a reversal he couldn't yet imagine. "Review Thompson's background one more time," Margaret instructed, testing my preparation. Robert Thompson, 63, founded NorthStar Technologies 15 years ago after a successful career at Microsoft. I recited smoothly. Engineering background with an MBA from Stanford. Built NorthStar from a 3-person startup to a respected mid-sized player in logistics software. conservative growth strategy, debt-averse, values company culture and employee retention. No children, likely viewing NorthStar as his professional legacy. Good, Margaret nodded. And our leverage points? Limited capital for necessary expansion, increasing pressure from larger competitors with more resources, and Thompson's approaching retirement without a clear succession plan. This last point represented NorthStar's most significant vulnerability. Thompson had built an innovative company, but hadn't groomed an heir apparent, creating uncertainty about the firm's future beyond his leadership. Perfect, Margaret confirmed. Thompson arrives in 10 minutes. Remember, this initial meeting is exploratory. We're assessing fit and interest, not pushing for commitment. Let him believe this is his opportunity, not ours. As Margaret stepped out to take a call before Thompson's arrival, I found myself gazing at the Seattle skyline, mind drifting momentarily to David. Was he at the office yet? Had he noticed my absence from our usual Monday morning text exchange, where we wished each other good weeks? Did he realize how comprehensively his life was about to change, professionally as well as personally? I pushed the thoughts aside, drawing myself back to the present moment. Today wasn't about David. It was about leveraging an authentic business opportunity that would advance my career regardless of its impact on my soon-to-be ex-husband. The fact that those advancements would intersect with his professional world was circumstantial, not causal. At precisely 9, Robert Thompson was ushered into the conference room. He matched his reputation perfectly. Tall, trim, with the purposeful movements of someone who had built success through disciplined effort rather than inherited advantage. His handshake was firm, his assessment of me quick but thorough as Margaret made introductions. Sarah Mitchell, our Executive Vice President of Operations, Margaret said smoothly. Sarah specializes in integration strategy and operational excellence for technology firms. Pleasure, Thompson nodded, his Seattle accent carrying subtle traces of his Midwestern origins. I understand Wilson Strategic has been expanding its technology portfolio recently. We have, Margaret confirmed, gesturing for him to take a seat, which is precisely why I appreciated your willingness to meet today. We've been mapping the logistics software space for potential strategic alignments. The careful dance began, Margaret outlining our firm's interest in the sector without specifying NorthStar directly, Thompson acknowledging market consolidation, trends while maintaining a carefully neutral stance on his own company's position. It was negotiations at their most refined, two experienced strategists testing boundaries without revealing their full positions. I contributed selectively, demonstrating knowledge of the logistics software market and integration challenges specific to technology firms, establishing credibility without overreaching. Throughout, I maintained professional detachment, giving no indication that my soon-to-be ex-husband led product development at the very company under discussion. 40 minutes into this choreographed exchange, Margaret shifted the conversation, subtly but decisively. Robert, let's speak directly. NorthStar has built exceptional products with devoted clients, but you're facing the classic mid-sized dilemma: too established to pivot like startups, too small to compete with enterprise-level resources. Thompson's expression registered surprise at Margaret's directness, then thoughtful consideration. An accurate assessment, he acknowledged after a moment, though I wouldn't characterize our position as precarious. Not precarious, Margaret agreed. Strategic. You've built something valuable, something worth preserving and expanding. The question is whether you do that independently, with the attendant capital constraints and competitive pressures, or through strategic partnership that accelerates growth while preserving NorthStar's innovative culture. You've researched us specifically, Thompson observed. Not a question, but a statement. We have, Margaret confirmed. Your Logistics IQ platform represents precisely the kind of product innovation our implementation expertise could scale effectively. But more importantly, we respect what you've built. Not just technology, but organizational culture. This last point registered visibly with Thompson, whose expression softened slightly. Culture isn't easily quantified in acquisition spreadsheets, he noted. Too often, it's the first casualty of consolidation. Margaret nodded toward me. Sarah specializes in preserving the innovative engines that drive acquired companies while enhancing their reach and resources. Her approach focuses on integration that amplifies strengths rather than imposes new structures. Thompson turned his assessment, to me, more thorough now. You have experience with software company acquisitions specifically? Yes, I replied, transitioning smoothly into examples from my consulting portfolio, technology integrations I'd advised on, outcomes achieved, lessons learned. Throughout, I emphasized preservation of product development teams, strategic expansion of implementation resources, and careful cultural integration. Your approach sounds thoughtful, Thompson acknowledged, though I notice you haven't mentioned valuation yet. Margaret smiled slightly. That's deliberate, Robert. Valuation discussions become productive only after we've established alignment on strategic vision and integration philosophy. Otherwise, we're simply haggling over price without agreement on value. This approach clearly resonated with Thompson, whose own business philosophy prioritized relationships and long-term thinking over transactional outcomes. A refreshing perspective, he admitted. Most acquisition approaches begin and end with numbers. Numbers matter, Margaret assured him, but they follow from strategic alignment, not the reverse. The conversation continued for another 30 minutes, increasingly specific about potential synergies between our firms, market opportunities a combined entity might pursue, and governance structures that would preserve NorthStar's innovation capacity while leveraging our firm's resources. Throughout, I maintained perfect professional composure, contributing insights and addressing technical questions while revealing nothing of my personal connection to NorthStar. If Thompson noticed anything unusual in my manner, he gave no indication. As our meeting concluded, Thompson's demeanor had shifted from cautious assessment to genuine interest. This has been enlightening, he acknowledged, gathering his materials. You've given me considerable food for thought. We appreciate your time, Margaret replied smoothly. Perhaps we could continue the conversation later this week, bringing in some additional perspectives from both organizations. Thompson hesitated briefly, clearly weighing the implications of escalating discussions. Thursday might work, he said finally, though I'd prefer to keep the circle small at this stage. Of course, Margaret agreed. Discretion is paramount until we determine whether there's sufficient alignment to proceed more formally. As Thompson departed, Margaret turned to me, with satisfaction evident in her expression. Well done, she said simply. He's intrigued. More importantly, he's thinking about legacy preservation rather than just financial transaction. He didn't commit to anything specific, I observed. He doesn't need to yet, Margaret replied. The fact that he's willing to continue conversations later this week is significant. Thompson isn't known for entertaining acquisition discussions. She gathered her portfolio. Prepare for Thursday. We'll want to introduce specific integration scenarios without revealing too much of our valuation approach yet. I nodded, already mentally outlining the integration models we might present. And the additional perspectives you mentioned? From our side, legal and financial, Margaret explained. From his, I suspect he'll bring his CFO and possibly a senior product person to evaluate our technical understanding. She paused, watching my expression. That could include your husband, given his position. The possibility sent an unexpected jolt through me. Facing David across a conference table, maintaining professional demeanor while discussing the acquisition of his company, it would be the ultimate test of my capacity to separate personal history from professional responsibility. If that happens, I'll handle it appropriately, I assured her. projecting more confidence than I felt. Margaret studied me for a long moment. "See that you do. This acquisition makes strategic sense independent of your personal situation. Don't compromise it with emotional undercurrents." "Understood," I replied, gathering my materials. "I'll have integration scenarios prepared by Wednesday for your review." As I left Margaret's office, my phone buzzed with a text from Michael Green, my divorce attorney. "Court date secured for initial filing. Need to discuss discovery requirements. Available this afternoon?" The parallel tracks of my life, professional advancement and personal disentanglement, continued their simultaneous progression. I confirmed a 3-hour meeting with Michael, then headed to my newly assigned executive office to begin developing the integration scenarios for Thursday's meeting. Throughout the day, I maintained laser focus on the acquisition strategy, pushing thoughts of David to the periphery of my consciousness. The work was complex but energizing, mapping NorthStar's organizational structure against our firm's capabilities, identifying complementary strengths and potential friction points, designing governance models that would preserve innovation while enabling scaling. By late afternoon, I had developed 3 distinct integration approaches, each preserving NorthStar's product development culture while enhancing its market reach through our firm's resources. I was reviewing financial projections for each scenario when my calendar alert reminded me of my appointment with Michael. The transition from acquisition strategy to divorce proceedings created a peculiar form of cognitive whiplash, 2 life-altering processes requiring entirely different mental frameworks, yet running concurrently through my days. I gathered my things and headed to Michael's office, consciously shifting my focus from business integration to personal disintegration. Michael's office remained as I remembered it, modern, light-filled, more reminiscent of a contemporary design studio than a traditional law firm. He greeted me with professional warmth, immediately turning to the stack of documents prepared for my review. "We've secured a court date 3 weeks from today for the initial filing," he explained, sliding a calendar printout across his desk. "That gives us time to complete financial disclosure requirements and prepare the formal separation agreement." "David hasn't secured counsel yet," I noted. "At least, I haven't been contacted by anyone representing him." Michael nodded. "Not unusual at this stage. Many spouses delay engaging representation, either hoping for reconciliation or simply processing the emotional reality before addressing legal aspects." He pushed another document toward me. "This is our proposed asset division based on your financial disclosures. Review it carefully before we proceed." I examined the document, noting the meticulous categorization of our marital assets. The downtown condo, investment accounts, retirement funds, personal property, each assigned appropriate valuation and proposed distribution. The clinical dissection of our shared life continued to feel surreal, reducing a decade of partnership to columns of assets and liabilities. "The division seems equitable," I acknowledged, noting that the proposal granted David the condo in exchange for a larger portion of our investment portfolio for me, though I'm not sure he'll agree to these terms without negotiation. "Few initial proposals survive contact with opposing counsel unchanged," Michael agreed. "This gives us room to maneuver while maintaining an objectively fair position." He tapped another section of the document. "Note that we've included a confidentiality provision regarding your professional activities." I reviewed the clause, which specifically prohibited either party from disclosing privileged business information obtained during the marriage. The provision would effectively prevent David from revealing my involvement in NorthStar's acquisition if he learned of it during divorce proceedings. "Is this standard?" I asked, though I suspected it wasn't. "No," Michael admitted. "But given your unique professional circumstances, it provides necessary protection against potential conflicts. If challenged, we'd argue it simply formalizes existing professional obligations rather than imposing new restrictions." I signed where indicated, the decisiveness of my signature belying the complexity of emotions beneath the surface. With each document, each signature, I was systematically dismantling the legal framework of my marriage just as methodically as I was constructing the strategy for NorthStar's acquisition. "What happens next?" I asked as Michael gathered the signed documents. "We file the initial petition, serve David formally, and begin the mandatory financial disclosure process," he explained. "Washington's 90-day waiting period starts from filing, which places us on track for finalization by early fall, assuming no significant disputes arise." "And if disputes do arise?" Michael's expression turned pragmatic. "Then we negotiate, mediate if necessary, and prepare for potential court appearances to resolve contentious issues. But based on your situation, no children, clearly delineated assets, documented infidelity, I anticipate a relatively straightforward process, albeit emotionally challenging." As I left Michael's office, Seattle's persistent drizzle had intensified to steady rain. Pedestrians hurrying along sidewalks with umbrellas and rain jackets pulled tight against the weather. The metaphor wasn't lost on me. Life continuing. Its rhythms despite personal storms, people navigating through temporary downpours toward whatever shelter awaited them. My phone buzzed with a text from Emily. "Dinner at my place tonight? Wine, takeout, and zero judgment about whatever emotional state you're in." The offer tempted me. Emily's unwavering support had been essential through the initial shock of discovering David's betrayal. But tonight, I needed solitude to process the parallel transformations unfolding in my life. "Rain check?" I replied. "Need quiet tonight to prepare for big meeting Thursday." Emily's response came quickly. "Of course, self-care looks different for everyone. Call if you need anything, day or night." I directed my rideshare to the extended stay hotel I'd checked into after leaving David. The space was impersonal but functional, a studio apartment with basic kitchen facilities, neutral decor, and blessed anonymity. No doorman greeting. Me by name, no neighbors aware of my marital status, no memories embedded in furnishings or views. As rain pattered against the windows, I ordered dinner from a nearby Thai restaurant and spread my work across the small dining table. Integration scenarios for NorthStar on one side, divorce documentation on the other, the bifurcation of my focus, a visual representation of my current reality. I was deep in financial projections when my phone lit up with David's name. For a moment, I considered ignoring the call as I had most of his attempts at contact over the past several days. But practical concerns prevailed. Maintaining some level of civil communication would facilitate the divorce process, even if emotional boundaries remained firmly in place. "Hello, David," I answered, my tone deliberately neutral. "Sarah," sounded simultaneously relieved and anxious. "Thank you for picking up. I wasn't sure you would." "What do you need?" I asked, bypassing social preliminaries. "I received papers from your attorney today," he said, a note of disbelief in his voice. "Divorce papers, Sarah. After 10 years, don't you think this deserves more than legal documents and proposed asset divisions?" I closed my eyes briefly, steeling myself against the plaintive quality in his voice. "What would you suggest, David? More conversations where you attempt to minimize a year-long affair? More explanations about how I was supposedly too focused on my career while you were betraying our marriage?" "That's not fair," he protested. "I'm not denying what I did was wrong. I'm just asking for a chance to talk through this like the partners we've been for a decade, not immediately leaping to lawyers and court dates." The irony of his appeal to partnership wasn't lost on me. Partnership requires trust and honesty, both of which you comprehensively violated. The legal process simply acknowledges the reality you created. Silence stretched between us, filled with the static of geographic and emotional distance. When David spoke again, his tone had shifted from persuasive to resigned. "I've retained counsel," he said finally. Martin Walsh from Brenner and Walsh. He'll be contacting your attorney to discuss next steps." "That's appropriate," I acknowledged, relieved that we were transitioning to practical matters rather than emotional appeals. "There's something else," David continued, hesitation evident in his voice. "Something strange happened at work today. Robert Thompson called a closed meeting with senior leadership for Thursday. Rumors are flying about potential investment or acquisition interest." He paused. "You wouldn't know anything about that, would you?" The direct question caught me off guard. David had never shown particular interest in my client engagements, and the sudden inquiry about his company's potential acquisition struck me as suspiciously specific. "Why would you ask me that?" I countered, careful to maintain neutral tone despite the sudden acceleration of my pulse. "Because Thompson mentioned meeting with investment consultants, and your firm is known for facilitating acquisitions in the tech sector," David replied. It seemed like a possibility worth exploring, given the timing. The implication was clear. David suspected my professional involvement in NorthStar's situation, though he couldn't yet know the extent of it. I considered my response carefully, aware that confirmation would complicate both the acquisition process and our divorce proceedings, while outright denial would constitute a lie I wasn't willing to tell despite our fractured relationship. "You? No, I can't discuss client engagements, David," I said finally. "Professional confidentiality applies regardless of personal circumstances." "So there is an engagement," he pressed, seizing on my non-denial. "I didn't say that," I corrected. "I simply reminded you of standard professional boundaries. Your company's business decisions are exactly that, your company's business." David was silent for a moment. "This feels connected, Sarah. The timing is too coincidental. You discover my affair, immediately file for divorce, and suddenly my company is entertaining acquisition discussions? Are you using your professional position to impact my career as punishment for my personal mistakes?" The accusation, though not entirely unwarranted, triggered a flash of indignation. "That's an impressive demonstration of your continued self-absorption, David. Not everything is about you or our marriage. My professional decisions are based on business strategy, not personal vendetta." "So you are involved?" he concluded, interpreting my defense as confirmation. I sighed, recognizing the conversational trap I'd inadvertently entered. "This discussion isn't productive. If you have questions about your company's strategic direction, you should address them to Robert Thompson. If you have questions about our divorce proceedings, direct them to my attorney." "That's it? That's all you have to say after 10 years together?" The hurt in his voice was genuine, which made it all the more difficult to maintain emotional distance. "What would you have me say, David?" I asked, fatigue suddenly weighing on me. "That I forgive you for systematically betraying our marriage for a year while I rearranged my professional ambitions to prioritize our relationship? That I'm willing to overlook the elaborate fictions you created to justify your infidelity? What exactly are you looking for here?" "I don't know," he admitted, his voice smaller now. "Some acknowledgement that what we had meant something. That it deserves more than clinical dismantling through attorneys and asset spreadsheets." A lump formed in my throat, unexpected emotion rising despite my determination to maintain composure. What we had did mean something, David. To me, at least. That's precisely why your betrayal cut so deeply. But meaning doesn't create obligation to perpetuate something fundamentally broken. Is that how you see our marriage? As fundamentally broken? "I see it as irreparably damaged by your systematic deception," I clarified. "Trust, once shattered, isn't easily restored, particularly when the breaking was deliberate and sustained over time." Another silence stretched between us, this one heavy with unspoken recognitions. When David spoke again, resignation had replaced persuasion in his tone. "Walsh will contact your attorney tomorrow," he said. "For what it's worth, I never stopped loving you, Sarah." not even during the worst of my mistakes. The declaration hung between us, sincere but ultimately hollow, given the actions that contradicted it. I considered various responses: cutting, remarks about how his version of love looked remarkably like betrayal, philosophical observations about love's insufficiency without respect and honesty, even nostalgic acknowledgement of what we'd once meant to each other. Instead, I chose the simplest truth. "Goodbye, David," I said quietly, ending the call before emotion could compromise the boundaries I'd worked so hard to establish. I sat motionless in my impersonal hotel room, rain still tapping against the windows in gentle counterpoint to my racing thoughts. David's suspicions about my professional involvement with NorthStar complicated an already complex situation. If he confirmed my role in the acquisition discussions, would he attempt to leverage that information in our divorce proceedings? Would NorthStar's leadership view my participation as a conflict of interest if they learned of my personal connection? These questions circled through my consciousness as I returned to the integration scenarios spread across the table. The boundaries between personal and professional continued to blur, despite my determination to maintain separation, an ironic echo of the very justification David had used for his affair with Jessica. Yet, as I worked late into the evening, refining projections and governance models, I found renewed clarity in the work itself. Whatever David suspected or discovered about my professional involvement with NorthStar, the acquisition strategy remained sound on its business merits. My relationship to the company's senior product director was circumstantial, not causal, to the strategic opportunity the acquisition represented. Similarly, our divorce proceedings would progress according to legal frameworks, regardless of our ongoing emotional entanglements. Washington's community property laws, the documented evidence of infidelity, our lack of children, these factors would shape the dissolution of our marriage more than any lingering feelings or accusations. By midnight, I had completed both the integration scenarios for Margaret's review and my financial disclosure documentation for Michael. The parallel tracks of my professional advancement and personal disentanglement continued their simultaneous progression, overlapping yet distinct, each demanding focused attention and strategic thinking. As I prepared for bed, I found myself contemplating the irony that David's betrayal, initially devastating, had inadvertently catalyzed the most significant professional opportunity of my career. The promotion I'd declined to preserve our marriage now anchored my future, while the acquisition his company faced might never have crossed my radar had I not been seeking distraction from personal pain. Life's strange symmetries continued to unfold, outcomes emerging from circumstances neither of us could have anticipated when exchanging vows a decade earlier. Whatever happened Thursday when NorthStar's leadership, potentially including David, joined our acquisition discussions, I would face it with the same determined focus that had carried me through the past tumultuous days. The rain continued its gentle percussion against the windows as I drifted toward sleep, the sound both melancholy and cleansing, nature's reminder that storms, however disruptive, eventually yield to clearing skies and new beginnings. Thursday. Morning dawned clear and bright, a rare gift in Seattle's typically overcast spring. I stood at my hotel window, watching dawn light gild the city skyline, steeling myself for the day ahead. In just 3 hours, I would be sitting across a conference table from NorthStar's leadership team, potentially including David, discussing the acquisition that would reshape not just the company, but the professional landscape my soon-to-be ex-husband inhabited. Margaret had called the previous evening, confirming our suspicions about who Thompson would bring to the meeting. He's bringing 3 people: his CFO, Jennifer Adams, his Chief Technology Officer, Alan Reeves, and she paused briefly. David Mitchell, Senior Product Director. I had anticipated this possibility since our initial meeting with Thompson, but hearing it confirmed sent an unexpected flutter of anxiety through me. "I'll handle it professionally," I assured her, projecting more confidence than I felt. "See, that you do," Margaret replied. Thompson was clear that you impressed him on Monday. Don't let personal complications undermine that perception. Now, as I dressed with deliberate care, selecting a navy suit that projected authority without aggression, adding my grandmother's pearl earrings for a touch of personal strength, I rehearsed potential scenarios. David might react with surprise, confusion, or anger upon seeing me. Thompson might question my involvement once he realized my personal connection to David. Other participants might notice tension and draw conclusions that could undermine the negotiation. For each possibility, I formulated responses that acknowledged reality while maintaining professional focus. Yes, David Mitchell is my husband. We are currently separating. This personal circumstance has no bearing on the strategic opportunity this acquisition represents. Then redirect to the business fundamentals that made the acquisition compelling, independent of any personal considerations. My phone chimed with a text from Emily. Good luck today. Remember, you've earned your seat at that table regardless of David's presence. Own it. Emily's unwavering support had been essential through these tumultuous weeks. Unlike my other friends who offered sympathy laced with pity, Emily consistently reinforced my professional identity separate from my dissolving marriage, reminding me that I was more than David Mitchell's soon-to-be ex-wife. At precisely 8:30, I arrived at our firm's offices, proceeding directly to the conference room where Margaret waited with our financial and legal representatives. The room had been carefully arranged, presentation materials ready, refreshments selected for understated quality, seating strategically positioned to facilitate productive discussion. Our approach remains unchanged, Margaret was instructing the team as I entered. This meeting is about structural alignment and integration philosophy, not final terms. We want them comfortable with how the acquisition would unfold before we discuss specific valuations. She nodded at my arrival. Sarah will lead the integration overview, focusing on how we preserve their product development culture while enhancing market reach. I took my assigned seat, reviewing my presentation materials one final time. The integration models I'd developed were sound, balancing preservation of NorthStar's innovative product culture with necessary structural changes to leverage our firm's resources. Objectively, the acquisition made perfect business sense regardless of my personal connection to the company. At precisely 9:00, our receptionist announced NorthStar's arrival. Margaret rose to greet them, her posture conveying confident welcome. I remained seated, arranging my expression into professional neutrality, preparing for the inevitable moment when David would recognize me across the conference table. Robert Thompson entered first, followed by a petite woman with sharp features whom I recognized as Jennifer Adams, NorthStar's CFO. Behind her came Alan Reeves, the company's long-standing CTO, a bearded man with the slightly rumpled appearance, common to technical leaders who prioritized function over form. And then David. He stepped into the room with the confident posture he always adopted in professional settings, scanning the assembled participants with practiced ease. His gaze swept past me initially, then snapped back, recognition dawning with visible shock that he quickly attempted to mask. I met his eyes briefly, acknowledging his presence with a slight nod, before returning my attention to Margaret, who was making introductions. You know our legal and financial team, Margaret was saying to Thompson, and you've met Sarah Mitchell, our Executive Vice President of Operations, who will be leading our discussion of integration strategy today. Thompson turned to me with approving recognition. Of course, Ms. Mitchell made quite an impression on Monday with her insights about preserving innovative culture through acquisition transitions. From the corner of my eye, I could see David processing this information, connecting dots between my recent promotion and my presence at this acquisition meeting for his company. His expression shifted from shock to dawning comprehension to something harder. Betrayal, perhaps, or anger at what he likely perceived as deliberate manipulation. "Shall we begin?" Margaret suggested, gesturing for everyone to be seated. The careful choreography of high-level negotiation began. Margaret outlining our continued interest in NorthStar's technology and market position, Thompson acknowledging openness to strategic partnership while maintaining appropriate reservation about specific terms. Throughout, I kept my contributions focused and professional, avoiding direct engagement with David beyond necessary exchanges related to product development questions. For his part, David maintained remarkable composure, answering technical inquiries about NorthStar's product roadmap with his usual articulate precision. If others in the room noticed the undercurrent of tension between us, they gave no indication, the discussion proceeding with the practiced civility of experienced business negotiators. An hour into the meeting, Margaret transitioned to my segment. Sarah has developed several integration models that we believe preserve NorthStar's innovative strengths while enhancing scalability. I'll let her walk us through the approaches we're considering. I rose, moving to the presentation screen with deliberate calm. Thank you, Margaret. Before diving into specific models, I want to emphasize our fundamental philosophy regarding technology acquisitions. We believe that innovation engines require preservation, not reformation. The goal isn't to absorb NorthStar into our existing structure, but rather to enhance its capabilities through strategic resource allocation and expanded market access. As I outlined the 3 integration approaches I'd developed, I maintained steady eye contact with Thompson and Adams, deliberately avoiding prolonged focus on David. Each model presented slightly different organizational structures, but all preserved NorthStar's product development autonomy while introducing enhanced implementation resources, expanded sales channels, and strategic leadership additions. The key difference between these approaches, I explained, highlighting comparison slides, is the governance relationship between product development and market implementation. Model A maintains complete separation with coordination through executive oversight. Model B creates integrated client teams while preserving separate development cycles. Model C establishes hybrid squads with both development and implementation expertise focused on specific market segments. Thompson leaned forward, clearly intrigued by the thoughtfulness of the approach. This level of detail regarding integration philosophy is unusual in initial acquisition discussions, he observed. Most potential acquirers focus exclusively on financial terms and synergy projections. Numbers follow structure, Margaret interjected smoothly. We believe understanding how the combined entity would function is essential to determining appropriate valuation. All 3 models Sarah has presented preserve what makes NorthStar valuable, its innovative product development culture, while addressing the scaling challenges you've faced. Jennifer Adams, NorthStar's CFO, had been taking detailed notes throughout my presentation. Now she looked up with a precisely formulated question. These models present clear organizational structures, but what about leadership transitions? Specifically, where do current NorthStar executives and directors fit in these scenarios? The question brought us directly to the issue I'd carefully structured my presentation to address indirectly. Now, with Adams's direct inquiry, I needed to explicitly outline the leadership implications that would impact David's position. Excellent. Question? I acknowledged, advancing to a slide I'd positioned later in the presentation. Leadership continuity is essential for successful integration. Our approach envisions Robert continuing as chairman emeritus, focusing on client relationships and strategic direction. I nodded toward Thompson, who inclined his head slightly in acknowledgement. For other key leadership roles, I continued, we envision a thoughtful transition process rather than immediate restructuring. The CTO role remains essentially unchanged, continuing to drive technical architecture and innovation. I nodded toward Reeves, who appeared relieved by this clarification. Then came the delicate part. For product development leadership, we propose an enhanced structure that maintains current director-level responsibilities while introducing additional resources for scaling. This preserves continuity while addressing the implementation challenges NorthStar has faced with larger clients. I didn't specifically mention David's position or look directly at him while explaining this aspect, but the implication was clear to everyone at the table. His role would remain, but under new oversight, specifically mine as the executive responsible for post-acquisition integration and operations. David shifted subtly in his chair, the only visible sign of his reaction to learning that his soon-to-be ex-wife would effectively become his boss if the acquisition proceeded. To his credit, he maintained professional composure, though the tension in his jaw betrayed his emotional response to this revelation. Thompson, ever the shrewd observer, glanced between David and me with narrowed eyes, clearly sensing an undercurrent he hadn't previously detected. "You seem to have unusually detailed understanding of our organizational dynamics, Ms. Mitchell," he noted. "Have you worked with NorthStar in some capacity previously?" The question hung in the air, presenting the precise challenge I'd prepared for but hoped to avoid. Margaret caught my eye briefly, her expression conveying clear instruction. "Address it directly, then refocus on business fundamentals." "I haven't worked with NorthStar professionally," I acknowledged. "However, in the interest of full disclosure, David Mitchell and I have a personal relationship." I kept my tone matter-of-fact, as if sharing a minor biographical detail rather than revealing that the company's senior product director was my husband of 10 years currently engaged in divorce proceedings. Thompson's eyebrows rose slightly. "I see," he said, glancing at David, whose expression remained carefully neutral, though spots of color had appeared high on his cheekbones. "That's an interesting circumstance given the nature of our discussions." "It's a circumstance that has no bearing on the strategic opportunity this acquisition represents," Margaret interjected smoothly. "Sarah's role in this process is based on her exceptional track record with technology integrations and operational excellence. The personal connection to Mr. Mitchell was disclosed internally and appropriate protocols established to maintain objectivity in our assessment." This wasn't entirely accurate. I had disclosed my marriage but not the impending divorce or David's infidelity. But it established the narrative we needed. That my personal connection was known and managed rather than concealed. "Of course," Thompson nodded, though his expression remained thoughtful. "Shall we continue with the presentation?" The remainder of the meeting proceeded with superficial professionalism, masking heightened alertness from all participants. Completed my integration overview, fielding technical questions from Adams and Reeves, while David remained conspicuously silent, beyond necessary contributions to specific product inquiries. As the meeting concluded, Margaret skillfully established next steps. A follow-up session the following week to discuss financial models and potential valuation approaches. Thompson agreed, though with slightly more reservation than he'd shown earlier, clearly processing the implications of the personal connection he'd just discovered. David left immediately after final handshakes, avoiding direct interaction with me. I remained behind with Margaret and our team, debriefing the meeting and planning adjustments for our next approach based on NorthStar's responses. "That complication was inevitable," Margaret observed once we were alone. "Thompson's no fool. He would have discovered your connection to Mitchell eventually. Better addressed directly than emerging later as a perceived deception." "Do you think it will affect his interest in the acquisition?" I asked, concerned that my personal situation might undermine the business opportunity. Margaret considered this thoughtfully. "Possibly, but not decisively. Thompson's primary concern is his legacy and the future of the company he built. If he believes our approach best serves those interests, he'll proceed, despite the complication." She fixed me with her penetrating gaze. "The question is whether you and Mitchell can maintain professional boundaries if this proceeds." "I can," I assured her, projecting more confidence than I felt. "David's behavior today suggests he can as well, despite the obvious tension." "Good," Margaret nodded, "because I expect him to contact you directly after this. How you handle that conversation may determine whether this acquisition advances or collapses." Her prediction proved accurate. Less than an hour after leaving our offices, I received a text from David. We need to talk. Not as husband and wife, but as professionals with significant conflict of interest issues to address. Canon Coffee, 3 p.m.? The suggested location was significant. Neither our typical meeting places nor anywhere near either of our offices. Neutral territory for a conversation that would inevitably blend personal history with professional implications. I considered declining, suggesting any discussion happen through our respective counsel. But Margaret was right. How I handled this interaction would likely influence NorthStar's receptiveness to the acquisition. More importantly, avoiding David wouldn't resolve the fundamental tension his presence created in the process. I'll be there, I replied simply. Canon Coffee occupied a converted warehouse space in a transitional neighborhood. Its industrial aesthetics and excellent espresso attracting a mix of creative professionals and students from nearby universities. I arrived 15 minutes early, selecting a table in the back corner that offered privacy without isolation. David arrived precisely at 3, scanning the space briefly before spotting me. He looked exhausted, I realized with an unexpected pang of empathy. The strain of recent events had left visible marks, slight shadows beneath his eyes, tension in his shoulders, a certain dulling of his typically animated expressions. "Thank you for coming," he said, settling into the chair opposite mine. He placed his phone face down on the table, a gesture I recognized from our marriage, his way of indicating full attention to a conversation. I ordered at the counter. "Hope that's okay." "It's fine," I replied, noting how quickly we'd reverted to the polite formalities of strangers despite a decade of intimacy. "You wanted to talk about the acquisition." David nodded, running a hand through his hair in the gesture I'd once found endearingly boyish. "To put it mildly, finding you across the conference table this morning was unexpected." "I imagine so," I acknowledged, "though you suspected my involvement when you called earlier this week." "Suspecting and seeing are different things," he countered. "Sarah, what exactly are you doing? Is this acquisition legitimate business or some elaborate revenge for my affair with Jessica?" The question carried genuine confusion beneath its accusatory tone. I considered my response carefully, aware that this conversation would likely shape both our divorce proceedings and the acquisition's progression. "The acquisition is legitimate business strategy," I stated firmly. "NorthStar has innovative products but limited resources for scaling. Our firm has implementation expertise and capital for expansion. The synergies are obvious independent of any personal considerations." "But the timing," David pressed. "You discover my affair, immediately take a promotion you've repeatedly declined, and within days you're orchestrating the acquisition of my company? That's quite a coincidence." "Not a coincidence," I corrected. "A consequence. For years, I limited my professional advancement to maintain what I believed was a balanced marriage. When I discovered that sacrifice was unilateral, that you were pursuing your desires without similar constraint, I reassessed my priorities. The barista delivered our drinks, my typical Americano and David's preferred cappuccino, creating a momentary pause in our intense exchange. I watched him add a packet of sugar, the familiar gesture highlighting the strange intimacy of discussing business strategy with someone who knew my most personal habits and vulnerabilities. "So this is what, then?" David asked finally. "Professional? Liberation catalyzed by personal betrayal?" "That's one interpretation," I acknowledged, "though it places you rather centrally in a decision process that wasn't primarily about you. The acquisition makes business sense. That it affects your professional situation is incidental, not causal." David studied me with the focused attention I'd once found flattering, but now recognized as slightly calculating. "And if Thompson asks directly whether our personal situation influenced your interest in NorthStar, I'll tell him the truth, that I became aware of NorthStar's potential through industry connections, including personal ones. but that our firm's interest is based on objective business assessment. I met his gaze steadily. My role in the vow acquisition process has been properly disclosed internally, with appropriate protocols to manage potential conflicts. And my role in the new organization? David asked, the question revealing his central concern. Those integration models you presented rather conspicuously position me under your direct authority if the acquisition proceeds. The organizational structures follow from strategic necessity, I replied. Product development needs enhanced connection to implementation resources to address scaling challenges. That places your current position under operations oversight in the integrated organization. My position under your authority, David clarified, a edge of bitterness entering his tone. Quite the reversal from our marriage dynamic where you consistently accommodated my career priorities. The observation stung with its accuracy. Throughout our marriage, I had indeed calibrated my professional choices to complement, rather than compete with David's ambitions, believing we were building something meaningful together, rather than engaging in zero-sum competition. That arrangement reflected my choices based on what I understood our marriage to be, I said carefully. Recent revelations have necessitated reassessment of many assumptions. David flinched slightly, the reference to his affair landing as intended. And now our professional lives become another battlefield for personal grievances? No, I stated firmly. That's precisely what I'm avoiding. The acquisition proceeds based on business merits or doesn't proceed at all. My personal history with you remains separate from that assessment. Can it really? David challenged. Can you honestly claim your evaluation of NorthStar isn't colored by what's happened between us? That you wouldn't take some satisfaction in restructuring the company where I've built my career? The question demanded a level of personal interrogation I hadn't fully engaged since discovering his betrayal. Had my interest in NorthStar been influenced by the prospect of professional ascendancy over the husband who had betrayed me? Was there an element of retribution in my meticulous integration planning that positioned his role beneath my authority? I won't pretend my personal and professional motivations exist in perfect isolation, I admitted finally. But the acquisition strategy stands on its business merits regardless of any satisfaction I might find in the resulting organizational structure. David absorbed this with a thoughtful nod, seemingly appreciating the honesty even if the answer wasn't what he'd hoped for. At least that's straightforward, which is more than I've been recently. The acknowledgement, the closest he'd come to directly addressing his deception, created an unexpected opening for the question that had haunted me since discovering his affair. Why, David? After 10 years, why risk everything for an affair that you must have known would eventually be discovered? He looked startled by the sudden shift from professional strategy to personal pain, but after a moment's hesitation, he replied with unexpected candor. Because it was easier than addressing what was actually wrong between us. Which was what? I pressed, needing to understand the narrative he'd constructed to justify his betrayal. David sighed, staring into his cappuccino as if it might contain the articulation he sought. We stopped growing together years ago, Sarah. Our marriage became comfortable but static, predictable routines, careful accommodations, polite avoidance of anything that might disrupt the equilibrium we'd established. And that justifies betrayal? I challenged, careful to keep my voice low despite the emotion rising within me. Nothing justifies it, he acknowledged, surprising me with his directness. But it contextualizes it. Jessica represented something I thought I'd lost. Spontaneity, passion, the feeling that someone was genuinely curious about me rather than just accommodating my preferences. The assessment landed with painful accuracy. Our marriage had indeed settled into comfortable patterns, mutual consideration gradually replacing passionate engagement. I had interpreted this as maturation. David had experienced it as stagnation. You could have said something, I pointed out. Suggested counseling, expressed dissatisfaction, any number of options besides betrayal. I should have, he agreed. But confronting problems directly was never our strong suit, was it? We both became experts at adjustment rather than confrontation. You, declining career opportunities that might disrupt our balance. Me channeling restlessness into work projects rather than addressing it directly. The insight revealed a more complex dynamic than simply victimized wife and unfaithful husband. We had co-created a marriage where surface harmony masked deeper disconnections, mutual accommodation substituting for genuine growth. His affair had been unforgivable, but the conditions that preceded it had been collaborative. And now? I asked, uncertain what resolution I sought from this unexpected moment of mutual recognition. Where does this leave us, professionally and personally? Personally, I think we both know that's finished, David said quietly. Whatever we had is too damaged by what I did to be salvaged. The divorce proceeds as planned. I nodded, surprised by the absence of pain at this confirmation of our marriage's end. In its place was something like relief. Acknowledgement that neither of us could or should attempt to rebuild what had proved fundamentally flawed. And professionally? I prompted. David considered this thoughtfully. I can't prevent the acquisition. If Thompson decides it's the right strategic move for NorthStar, and objectively, your integration models make sense. They address precisely the scaling challenges we've struggled with internally. But? I sensed his hesitation. But I need to know I'll be evaluated fairly, that our personal history won't become a professional liability if you end up as my direct superior in the new organization. His concern was legitimate. The power dynamic would be unusually complex given our history. I can commit to professional assessment based on performance metrics, not personal history, I offered, and to recusal from direct decisions affecting your specific role if that provides necessary reassurance. David nodded slowly. I suppose that's as much protection as can reasonably be expected, given the circumstances. He paused, studying me with unexpected intensity. You know, I always admired your strategic thinking. I just never expected to find myself on the receiving end of it quite so comprehensively. The observation carried a rueful acknowledgement that bordered on respect, recognition that I had navigated our separation with the same focused determination I brought to professional challenges. In another context, it might have been a compliment. This isn't the ending either of us anticipated, I said finally. But perhaps it's the one that allows us both to move forward authentically, rather than compromising fundamental aspects of ourselves to maintain something that wasn't working. David considered this, then raised his cup in a gesture somewhere between toast and surrender. Two authentic paths forward, then. Separately, but perhaps not as adversaries. I raised my own cup in acknowledgement of this tentative truce. To authenticity, personally and professionally. As we finished our coffee in surprisingly companionable silence, I found myself contemplating the strange symmetry of our situation. The marriage that had once seemed the center of my life had collapsed, yet from its ruins emerged professional opportunities I'd denied myself to preserve that very relationship. David's betrayal had catalyzed my ambition, which in turn now reshaped his professional landscape. Life's ironies continued to unfold in unexpected patterns, outcomes emerging from circumstances neither of us could have anticipated when exchanging vows a decade earlier. Whatever happened with the acquisition, whether Thompson proceeded despite the complications or withdrew from negotiations, David and I had begun the delicate process of disentanglement, finding our separate paths forward, with as much dignity as our flawed humanity allowed. Outside Cannon Coffee, Seattle's spring sunshine had given way to characteristic afternoon clouds, the light turning soft and diffuse as we prepared to return to our separate lives. For a moment, standing on the sidewalk, I glimpsed the shadow of the young couple we'd once been. Ambitious, hopeful, believing ourselves equal to life's complexities. That chapter had ended, but others waited to be written, pages still blank but full of possibility. "Good luck with Thompson," David said as we parted. "Whatever happens with the acquisition, I suspect you'll land on your feet. You always do." The observation carried neither resentment nor admiration, simply acknowledgement of a truth he'd witnessed throughout our years together. I had indeed always found my footing, even when the ground shifted unexpectedly beneath me. This latest, seismic change would be no different. "Goodbye, David," I said simply, turning toward the future that awaited, complex, uncertain, but undeniably mine to shape. 3 months later, I stood at the window of my new corner office, gazing out at Seattle's skyline bathed in summer sunshine. The view was different from the one I'd shared with David in our downtown condo. More expansive, higher, offering perspective I hadn't possessed during our marriage. It seemed an apt metaphor for everything that had changed since that fateful Tuesday when I discovered his betrayal. The NorthStar acquisition had finalized last week after intensive negotiations that tested everyone's professional boundaries. Thompson had ultimately recognized the business logic despite the personal complications, signing the final documents with the pragmatic observation that emotions fade, but good strategy endures. The integration was proceeding according to the models I'd designed, with remarkably little friction given the circumstances. David had maintained his role as senior product director, now reporting to a vice president who reported to me, an organizational buffer we'd established to minimize direct interaction. We communicated primarily through formal channels, maintaining scrupulous professionalism during the few meetings circumstances required us to attend together. The divorce had proceeded with similar efficiency, finalized just days before the acquisition closed, a clean break personally coinciding with new professional connections. "Quarterly projections are ready for your review," my assistant announced, from the doorway, interrupting my reflection. "And Margaret wants to see you when you have a moment." "Thank you, Alex. I'll head to Margaret's office now." The path to Margaret's corner suite took me past what had once been NorthStar's separate offices, now integrated into our expanded floor plan. Through glass walls, I glimpsed David in a conference room, animatedly explaining something to a mixed team of original NorthStar developers and our implementation specialists. He seemed energized, focused, his professional passion undiminished by our personal dissolution. "Sarah," Margaret greeted me as I entered her office. "Sit. I've been reviewing the integration metrics. Impressive progress for just 7 days post-closing." "The transition planning is paying off," I acknowledged. "Product development throughput has maintained pre-acquisition levels while implementation capacity has already increased 30%. "And the human element?" Margaret asked, her penetrating gaze assessing more than operational metrics. I knew what she was really asking, whether my personal history with David was affecting the integration process. "Professional boundaries are holding," I assured her. "The organizational buffer is working as designed." Margaret nodded, satisfied with this assessment. "Thompson called this morning. He's pleased with the transition, particularly how we've maintained their innovation culture while expanding execution capabilities, exactly as you projected in your integration models." The validation should have felt triumphant, confirmation that my strategic vision was proving correct, that the acquisition I'd orchestrated was delivering its promised value. Instead, I felt a quiet satisfaction tinged with unexpected melancholy. Professional success couldn't entirely fill the space left by personal loss, however necessary that loss had been. "There's something else," Margaret continued, sliding a folder across her desk. "The board has approved establishing a new division focused specifically on technology integration, separate from ongoing operations. They want you to lead it." I opened the folder to find a formal offer letter outlining a new role, Executive Vice President of Strategic Integration, reporting directly to Margaret with expanded responsibilities and compensation that exceeded even my recent promotion. This is significant, I observed, scanning the details. It's recognition of exceptional performance under challenging circumstances, Margaret replied. Not everyone could have navigated the personal and professional complexities you've managed these past months. The irony wasn't lost on me. My marriage's collapse had catalyzed professional opportunities I might never have pursued otherwise. David's betrayal had inadvertently launched me into career advancement beyond what our careful marital compromises had allowed. I'll need a few days to consider, I said, though we both knew I would accept. The role represented exactly the strategic leadership position I'd been preparing for throughout my career. Of course, Margaret nodded, though I expect Jennings from the San Francisco office will be disappointed. He was the other candidate under consideration. As I left Margaret's office, offer letter in hand, I found myself taking a detour past the conference room where David's meeting was concluding. Team members filed out, engaged in animated technical discussions that suggested productive collaboration. David remained behind, gathering materials, not immediately noticing my presence. In the doorway, "Your team seems energized," I observed, maintaining professional neutrality despite the personal history that hummed beneath the surface of our interaction. David looked up, momentarily surprised by my presence before composing his expression into appropriate collegiality. "The integration is working better than I expected," he acknowledged. "Your framework for preserving development autonomy while connecting to implementation resources was insightful." The professional compliment carried personal weight neither of us acknowledged directly. For a moment, standing in the doorway of a corporate conference room surrounded by the trappings of business success, I glimpsed an alternate reality where we might have built something meaningful together, professionally and personally, if different choices had been made. "I've been offered a new position," I said, not entirely sure why I was sharing this with him. "Strategic Integration Division, separate from operations." "Congratulations," David replied, genuine despite the complexity between us. "You've earned it. I always knew you were capable of more than you allowed yourself to pursue." The observation stung with its accuracy. For years, I had indeed limited my professional ambitions to maintain what I'd believed was a balanced partnership. The painful irony was that those limitations had been unnecessary. David had pursued his desires without similar constraint, while I had voluntarily circumscribed mine. Sometimes we need unexpected catalysts to recognize our own capabilities, I said, the understatement deliberate, the reference to his betrayal oblique but unmistakable. David nodded, accepting this framing without defense. "For what it's worth," he said after a moment, "I'm glad something positive emerged from the mess I made. You deserve this success, Sarah." The sincere acknowledgement created an unexpected moment of closure, recognition that while our marriage had ended badly, it hadn't been entirely without value. We had each shaped the other's journey, for better and worse, in ways that continued to unfold even as our paths diverged. "Thank you," I said simply. "I hope you find what you're looking for, David, professionally and otherwise." As I turned to leave, he called after me softly. "I was wrong, you know, about why I strayed." When I paused, he continued, "It wasn't about passion or spontaneity. It was about avoiding the person I needed to become to be worthy of the partnership we'd promised each other." The insight, clearly hard-won through his own painful reckoning, offered no consolation for past betrayal, but provided something I hadn't realized I needed: understanding that transcended simplistic narratives of villain and victim. We had both contributed to the conditions that preceded his infidelity, though the choice to betray had been his alone. "Maybe we both needed to become different people," I offered, "just not together." Walking away toward my office, toward the new role that awaited and the future it represented, I felt a sense of genuine completion that legal documents and corporate restructuring hadn't provided. Some journeys required painful catalysts to reveal their necessary direction. Some relationships served their purpose not in lasting but in the growth their ending demanded. I had entered my marriage believing David and I would build a life together. Instead, we had ultimately catalyzed each other's separate evolutions. His betrayal launching my professional ascension, my response forcing his confrontation with deeper truths about himself. Not the outcome either of us had anticipated, but perhaps the one we had unknowingly needed. Outside my office window, Seattle's skyline gleamed in summer sunshine, the future stretching before me. Complex, challenging, but undeniably mine to shape on my own terms. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.